The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of pristine white marble, its crystalline dome offering a breathtaking view of the twin stars that illuminated the capital world of Nexus Prime. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, each area carefully designed to accommodate their unique physiological needs. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages, clicks, whistles, and telepathic emanations into something resembling universal understanding. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zilithian Empire adjusted his ceremonial robes, the bioluminescent threads pulsing with barely contained irritation. As the current chairman of the Galactic Defense Committee, he had called this emergency session to address what he considered the most pressing threat to galactic stability in over 2 centuries: the humans. These peculiar bipedal mammals from the Sol system had been discovered barely 50 standard years ago, yet they had already managed to upset the delicate balance that had maintained peace across the galaxy for millennia. Their rapid technological advancement, aggressive expansion, and, most disturbing of all, their complete disregard for established galactic protocols had the elder species deeply concerned. "Esteemed colleagues," Kethvar began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through quantum resonant speakers, "we gather today to discuss the human problem. In the short time since their admission to our galactic community, they have repeatedly demonstrated a dangerous unpredictability that threatens our established order." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled representatives. The Arcturian delegation, with their towering crystalline forms, chimed in harmonic discord. The insectoid Threx clicked their mandibles in synchronized disapproval. Even in normally peaceful Etherians, beings of pure energy contained within specially designed environmental suits, flickered with agitation. "Consider their military doctrine," continued the Zilithian ambassador, activating a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. "While we have evolved beyond such primitive concepts as total warfare and scorched earth tactics, humans continue to study and refine these barbaric practices. Their military academies teach courses on something called asymmetric warfare, the very idea that a smaller force might defeat a larger one through unconventional means." The display showed footage from human military exercises, soldiers moving with deadly precision through hostile environments, vehicles that could traverse any terrain, and weapons systems that seemed designed not just to defeat an enemy, but to utterly destroy them. To the galactic community, which had long ago settled conflicts through economic sanctions, diplomatic negotiations, and, at worst, limited skirmishes with predetermined rules of engagement, the human approach to warfare was both fascinating and terrifying. "But surely," interjected Ambassador Ilex of the Cephalopod Collective, her tentacles weaving complex patterns that serve as her species' equivalent of hand gestures, "their primitive nature will limit their expansion. Our xenobiologists have studied their physiology. They require very specific atmospheric conditions. They're vulnerable to radiation, and their lifespan is remarkably short. How much trouble could they possibly cause?" Kethvar's bioluminescent markings shifted to a deep purple, indicating severe concern. "That, honored Ilex, is precisely the problem. They don't seem to understand their limitations. 3 months ago, a human exploration vessel entered the Maelstrom Nebula, a region we've classified as absolutely impassable due to the gravitational anomalies and temporal distortions. Not only did they survive, they established a research station inside it." The chamber erupted in surprise chatter. The Maelstrom Nebula had claimed dozens of ships over the centuries, including vessels from species far more technologically advanced than humanity. The gravitational shears alone should have torn any human ship apart. Furthermore, Kethvar continued once order was restored, they've begun what they call terraforming operations on 12 different worlds that we had classified as completely uninhabitable. They're literally reshaping entire planets to suit their needs rather than adapting themselves to existing conditions. This revelation sent another wave of shock through the assembly. Most species, when they encountered a world that didn't meet their needs, simply moved on to find one that did. The idea of forcibly changing a planet's entire ecosystem was so audacious that many representatives struggled to process it. But perhaps most disturbing of all, the Zilithian ambassador said, his voice dropping to an ominous whisper that somehow carried perfectly throughout the chamber, is their complete disregard for established military hierarchies and command structures. They have something they call initiative, the idea that subordinates should think for themselves and adapt to changing circumstances rather than simply following orders. The hierarchy of Vega, a species that had built their entire civilization around rigid command structures and absolute obedience, began flashing warning colors so rapidly that their translation devices struggled to keep up. The very concept of soldiers making independent decisions was antithetical to everything they believed about proper military organization. "My fellow beings," Kethvar said, spreading his arms wide in a gesture that encompassed the entire assembly, "I propose that we implement immediate restrictions on human expansion and military development. For the good of galactic stability, we must contain this threat before it grows beyond our ability to control." The vote was swift and decisive. 46 species voted in favor of the resolution, with only the human delegation abstaining, a delegation that consisted of a single aging diplomat named Harrison Webb, who had spent most of the session quietly taking notes on an archaic paper tablet. As the representatives began filing out of the chamber, discussing implementation details and enforcement mechanisms, none of them noticed the small smile that played across Webb's weathered features. Nor did they see him activate a secure communication device and begin typing a simple message. "They've taken the bait. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2. 3 weeks after the Galactic Council's decision to implement restrictions on human activities, the first enforcement action was scheduled to take place in the Proxima Tertia system. The humans had established a mining operation on the third planet, extracting rare elements that were crucial for their advanced computer systems. According to the new restrictions, this operation was too close to the established Zilithian trade routes and would need to be relocated. Fleet Commander Zixtal of the Combined Galactic Enforcement Division had been chosen to oversee this first demonstration of the new policy. A veteran of 17 different peacekeeping missions, he commanded a fleet of 30 ships representing 12 different species, a show of unity that was intended to make clear that the entire galactic community stood behind these new restrictions. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima Tertia system in perfect formation, their combined sensor arrays immediately locating the human mining facility on the planet's surface. What they found was not what they expected. Instead of the crude industrial installation they had anticipated, the humans had constructed what appeared to be a small city. Geometric patterns of structures spread across nearly 100 square kilometers, connected by transportation networks that moved with mechanical precision. Massive orbital elevators stretched from the surface to stations in high orbit, where processed materials were being loaded onto cargo vessels for transport to other human colonies. "How is this possible?" Zixtal muttered, studying the tactical displays. "Our intelligence reports indicated this facility was established less than 6 months ago." His Arcturian tactical officer, a being whose crystalline structure allowed for rapid data processing, chimed a response. "Commander, the humans appear to have been using modular construction techniques. They fabricate standardized components at centralized facilities and then transport them for rapid assembly at the target location. But the scale of this operation, Zixtal species communicated partially through color changes in their skin, and is currently displayed the deep blue of confusion mixed with the orange of concern. Even with modular construction, this should have taken years to build." "Sir," interrupted his communications officer, a member of the telepathic Mindari species, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. It's from the Human Facility Administrator." On screen, Zixtal ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She was wearing what appeared to be practical work clothing rather than any kind of formal uniform, and she was smiling with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Greetings, Fleet Commander," she said in accented but clear Galactic standard. "I'm Sarah Chun, Site Supervisor for Proxima Mining Station Alpha. I understand you're here about the new Council restrictions. Would you like to come down for a tour of our facilities? I think you might find our operation interesting." Zixtal was taken aback by the casual, almost friendly tone. In his experience, when enforcement fleets arrived at disputed facilities, they were usually met with either defiance or fearful compliance. This human seemed almost pleased to see them. "Administrator Chun," he replied formally, "by order of the Galactic Council, this facility is in violation of Resolution 2847 Alpha regarding human expansion limitations. You have 72 standard hours to begin evacuation procedures." Chen's smile didn't waver. "I understand your position, Commander, but I think there might be some information missing from your briefing. This facility isn't just a mining operation. We're conducting critical research here that could benefit the entire galactic community. Before you make any final decisions, might I suggest we schedule a meeting? I'd hate for a misunderstanding to escalate unnecessarily." There was something in her tone, not threatening, but carrying an undertone that suggested she knew something the enforcement fleet didn't. Zixtal found himself curious despite his better judgment. "Very well," he decided. "I will transport down with a small security detail to inspect your facility. But I want to make it clear that this is not a negotiation. The Council's decision is final." "Of course, Commander. I completely understand. We'll have transportation waiting for you at the designated landing coordinates." 2 hours later, Zixtal found himself standing in what the humans called the operations center of their mining facility, and he was beginning to understand why Administrator Chun had been so confident. The facility wasn't just impressive in scale. It represented technological innovations that he hadn't seen before. "As you can see," Chun was saying as she led them through a corridor lined with transparent aluminum windows that offered views of the mining operations. "We're not just extracting raw materials here. We're using what we call closed-loop processing. Everything we take out of the ground is used, and all waste products are recycled back into the production cycle." Through the windows, Zixtal could see massive machines that moved with fluid precision, extracting ore from the planet's surface and feeding it into processing facilities that seemed to operate with impossible efficiency. What struck him most was the complete absence of the environmental damage that typically accompanied mining operations. "But how are you achieving this level of efficiency?" asked Lieutenant Korax, Zixtal's chief engineer. The insectoid officer's compound eyes were tracking dozens of different processes simultaneously. "Our computer models suggest this level of resource extraction should require at least 3 times the energy input you appear to be using." Chen's smile widened. "That's the beauty of human engineering philosophy, Lieutenant. We don't just solve the immediate problem. We solve all the problems we can think of at once. See those structures over there?" She pointed to a series of towers that seemed to be collecting energy from the planet's atmosphere. "Those are atmospheric processors. They're not just cleaning our emissions. They're actually improving the local air quality while generating power for our operations." "Impossible, Mutter de Corax. The energy expenditure alone will be prohibitive using traditional approaches." "Yes," Chen agreed. "But we humans have this tendency to approach problems from multiple angles simultaneously. Why build a power plant and an atmospheric processor and a waste management system when you can build one system that does all 3 jobs?" Zixtal was beginning to feel a growing sense of unease. The more he saw of this facility, the more he realized that his species, indeed, most of the galactic community, had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with when it came to human capabilities. The tour continued for several more hours, with Chun showing them innovations in materials processing, energy generation, transportation logistics, and environmental management that challenged basic assumptions about technological development. But it wasn't until they reached the final stop on their tour that Zixtal truly began to understand the magnitude of his miscalculation. "In this," Chun said, leading them into a vast underground chamber, is our manufacturing facility. The chamber stretched out before them like a mechanical cavern, filled with automated production lines that moved with hypnotic rhythm. But what caught Zixtal's attention wasn't the machinery. It was what the machinery was producing. Ships, dozens of them, in various stages of construction. Small, sleek vessels that looked nothing like the bulky cargo haulers and research ships that the galactic community associated with human space technology. What are those? Zixtal asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Emergency evacuation vessels, Chen replied innocently. Council regulations require that any facility this size maintain adequate emergency transportation for all personnel. We're simply being prudent. But Zixtal's tactical experience told him otherwise. Those weren't evacuation ships. They were patrol vessels, possibly even light warships. And if the humans were building them in underground facilities, that suggested they had been planning for this confrontation for some time. Administrator Chun, he said slowly, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation about your operations here. Her smile never wavered, but something in her eyes shifted, a hardness that spoke of steel beneath the friendly exterior. Of course, Commander. I think it's time we discussed what happens next. As if on cue, Zixtal's communications officer spoke up from behind him. Sir, we're receiving priority transmissions from a fleet. Long-range sensors are detecting multiple human ship signatures approaching from 7 different vectors. Chen nodded as if this was exactly what she had been expecting. Ah, that would be our security escort arriving. Commander, I think you should know that this facility isn't just a mining operation. It's what we humans call a proof of concept. We wanted to demonstrate that your new restrictions might be a bit more difficult to enforce than you anticipated. Zixtal felt his skin shift to the pale yellow of fear mixed with the deep red of anger. Are you threatening a Galactic Council enforcement fleet? Not at all, Chen replied calmly. But we thought it might be educational for you to understand that humans have this peculiar trait. We don't particularly like being told what we can and can't do, especially by people who don't really understand what we're capable of. The communications officer's voice took on an urgent tone. Commander, the approaching ships, there are more of them than our initial count suggested. A lot more. Through the facility's communication system, a new voice spoke with calm authority. Proxima Mining Station Alpha, this is Captain Rodriguez aboard the UES Determination. We are prepared to assist with your current diplomatic situation. Chen activated a response channel. Acknowledged, Captain. Please inform our guests that we have everything well in hand down here. Zixtal realized that what he had thought was a simple enforcement action had become something much more complex. The humans hadn't just built a mining facility. They had created a trap. And now his fleet was caught in the middle of it, facing an unknown number of human ships that had appeared as if from nowhere. What do you want? He asked Chen directly. Her friendly demeanor never changed, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. We want to have a conversation about those restrictions, Commander. A real conversation between equals about how we're all going to coexist in this galaxy. Because you see, you made one critical error in your assessment of humanity, which was you assumed that because we're new to the galactic community, we're weak. But humans have been dealing with bullies for thousands of years, Commander, and we've gotten very, very good at it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after Fleet Commander Zixtal's initial report from Proxima Tertius reached Nexus Prime. The vast chamber, which had seemed so imposing during the previous meeting, now felt suffocating as representatives from across the galaxy struggled to comprehend what had transpired. Ambassador Kethvar stood before the assembled delegates, his bioluminescent markings cycling through colors that hadn't been seen in the chamber for decades. Deep purples of alarm mixed with the harsh reds of military threat assessment. The holographic display behind him showed tactical readouts that made several of the more peaceful species visibly uncomfortable. Esteemed colleagues, Kethvar began, his voice carrying an undertone of barely controlled panic. The situation at Proxima Tertius has evolved beyond our initial parameters. Fleet Commander Zixtal's enforcement action has encountered complications. The understatement was so massive that several representatives began flashing their species equivalent of nervous laughter. The Etherians flickered like faulty light fixtures, while the Threx delegation clicked their mandibles in patterns that roughly translated to incredulous disbelief. According to the latest reports, Keth Var continued, calling up a three-dimensional tactical display. The human mining facility was not what it appeared to be. Intelligence analysis now suggests it was what humans call a honeypot, a deliberately attractive target designed to draw in potential threats for study or elimination. The display showed the current disposition of forces around Proxima Tertius, Zixtal's 30-ship enforcement fleet, now surrounded by what appeared to be over 200 human vessels that had emerged from concealment in the system's asteroid belt, gas giant rings, and even from behind the system's primary star. 200 ships. Ambassador Ilix's tentacles writhed in agitation. Our intelligence suggested humans possessed perhaps 50 vessels capable of interstellar travel. How is this possible? That, honored Ilix, is what we're trying to determine, Keth Var replied grimly. But what's more concerning is the nature of these vessels. They're not the simple cargo haulers and research ships we expected. Our analysts believe we're looking at a fleet of purpose-built military vessels. The chamber erupted in alarm chatter. The concept of a military fleet was so foreign to most species that their translation devices struggled to find appropriate equivalents. The Pacifican Collective, who had eliminated warfare from their society over 3 millennia ago, began emanating distress pheromones so strong that environmental systems activated to prevent contamination of other species' breathing apparatus. But, surely, interjected the representative from the Scholastic Republic, a species that prided itself on logical analysis, this must represent the entirety of human military capability? Even if they were concealing the true size of their fleet, the resource requirements for maintaining such a force would be enormous. Keth Var's markings shifted to an even darker shade of purple. We thought so too, which is why we dispatched additional reconnaissance drones to conduct a comprehensive survey of human space. What they discovered, he paused, seemingly struggling to find words. What they discovered suggests that Proxima Tertius is not unique. A new series of images appeared on the display, surveillance footage from a dozen different human colonies. Each one showed similar patterns, facilities that appeared modest from initial observation, but proved to be far more extensive and sophisticated than expected. Orbital installations that had been dismissed as simple communications arrays were revealed to be weapons platforms. Mining operations that possessed defensive capabilities rivaling military installations. Civilian transports that carried military-grade sensors and communications equipment. The humans, Keth Var said with dawning horror, appear to have militarized their entire civilization. The implications of this statement sent waves of panic through the assembly. For most galactic species, military force was a specialized function handled by dedicated personnel and equipment separate from civilian society. The idea of an entire civilization organized around military principles was not just foreign, it was terrifying. What does Fleet Commander Zixtal recommend? Asked the hierarchy of Vega representative, their normally rigid posture betraying signs of stress. The Fleet Commander, Keth Var replied slowly, is no longer in command of his mission. The silence that followed was deafening. He has been invited to participate in what the humans are calling diplomatic negotiations. His fleet remains surrounded but unharmed, and he has been granted permission to send regular status reports. However, it has been made clear that any attempt to leave the system or call for reinforcements will be viewed as an aggressive act. The representative from the Mindari Collective, their telepathic abilities allowing them to sense the emotional state of the entire chamber, suddenly spoke up with urgency. There's something else. Something they're not telling us. I can sense deception, but not from the humans, from our own intelligence services. All attention turned to Keth Var, whose bioluminescent patterns betrayed his discomfort. There have been additional developments. 3 hours ago, We lost contact with our border monitoring stations along the human frontier. Not all of them, just specific installations that were conducting covert surveillance of human activities. Lost contact how? Demanded the Arcturian delegate, their crystalline form resonating with harmonic alarm. The stations are undamaged and continue to function normally. Their personnel simply report that they are now receiving technical assistance from human advisors who arrive to help with routine maintenance issues. All attempts to recall these advisors or to send additional personnel to investigate have been politely declined. The full scope of what was happening began to dawn on the assembled representatives. The humans hadn't just been building military vessels. They had been conducting intelligence operations throughout galactic space, identifying and neutralizing potential threats to their operations. How is this possible? The question came from Ambassador Thrin of the Geometric Collective, a species known for their mathematical precision and logical thinking. Our security protocols should have made it impossible for any unknown species to infiltrate our monitoring systems. That's what we thought too, Kethvar admitted. But it appears we made certain assumptions about human capabilities that have proven inaccurate. As if summoned by these words, the chamber's main communication system activated with a soft chime. The image that appeared on the central display was of a human male, middle-aged with silver hair, and wearing what appeared to be a formal diplomatic uniform. Behind him, barely visible at the edges of the screen, were what looked like the familiar walls of a Galactic Council facility. Honored representatives, the human said with a slight smile, I am Admiral Harrison Webb, Special Diplomatic Envoy from the United Earth Colonial Administration. I apologize for interrupting your session, but I felt it was important that we have a conversation about recent events. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives demanded to know how a human had gained access to a secure council communication channel. Security officers began frantically checking their systems for signs of intrusion. Ambassador Kethvar's bioluminescent markings cycled through every color in the spectrum as he tried to process this latest development. Admiral Webb, Kethvar finally managed, his voice tight with barely controlled outrage. How did you gain access to this channel? And more importantly, what are your intentions? Webb's smile widened slightly. As to the first question, Ambassador, I think you'll find that human information technology has advanced considerably since our initial contact with the galactic community. As for our intentions, they're quite simple. We want to renegotiate the terms of our relationship. You are in no position to make demands. The hierarchy of Vega, representative declared, their rigid posture conveying absolute authority. Your fleet at Proxima Tertius may have achieved a temporary tactical advantage, but you're still vastly outnumbered by the combined forces of the galactic community. Webb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested amusement. With respect, honored representative, I think you may be operating under some misconceptions about the current strategic situation. Perhaps a visual aid would be helpful. The display split, showing Webb's image alongside a new tactical overview. But this wasn't centered on Proxima Tertius. It showed the Nexus Prime system itself. And surrounding the galactic capital world were dozens of sensor contacts that hadn't been there an hour earlier. As you can see, Webb continued conversationally, my colleagues in the Colonial Defense Force have been quite busy. Those contacts represent what we call a diplomatic escort, purely defensive in nature, of course, but positioned to ensure that our conversation here can proceed without any unfortunate interruptions. The panic in the chamber was now complete. Security alerts began sounding as Nexus Prime's orbital defense systems attempted to acquire targeting locks on the human vessels, only to discover that the ships were employing some form of stealth technology that made accurate targeting extremely difficult. This is an act of war, Ambassador Kethvar declared, his bioluminescent markings now flashing rapid red patterns of extreme aggression. Actually, Webb replied mildly, according to Galactic Council regulations, this is an act of diplomacy. Article 47 of the Galactic Charter specifically states that any member species has the right to request emergency negotiations if they feel their sovereignty is being threatened. That's exactly what we're doing. But you've surrounded our capital world with warships. I prefer to think of them as diplomatic observers. They're simply here to ensure that our conversation remains productive and that all parties feel secure enough to engage in meaningful dialogue. Webb's casual tone was perhaps more unsettling than outright threats would have been. There was something distinctly human about the way he was handling the situation, a combination of reasonableness and barely concealed strength that made it clear he was operating from a position of confidence rather than desperation. "What do you want?" Ambassador Ilex asked directly, her tentacles weaving patterns of grudging respect mixed with wariness. "What we want," Webb replied, his tone becoming more serious, "is for the galactic community to understand that humanity is not some primitive species that can be managed through restrictions and limitations. We've been studying your civilization since first contact, and we've learned quite a bit about how galactic politics really work." A new image appeared on the display, a detailed analysis of galactic military capabilities, showing the distribution of forces across different species and sectors. But what made the assembled representatives uncomfortable was how accurate and comprehensive the human intelligence appeared to be. "You see," Webb continued, "you operate under the assumption that military force is something crude and primitive, a tool used only by less advanced civilizations. But humans have a different perspective. We see military capability as one component of a balanced diplomatic strategy, not something to be used aggressively, but something that ensures other parties take your negotiations seriously." "Are you threatening us?" demanded the Etherian representative, their energy field flickering with agitation. "Not at all," Webb assured them. "But we are making it clear that the galaxy's newest members won't be pushed around by the older ones. Humanity is here to stay, and we're here as equals, not as junior partners who need to be managed for the good of galactic stability." Admiral Webb leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more intense. "Here's what I propose. We have a real conversation about how humanity fits into the galactic community. Not a conversation where you tell us what we're allowed to do, but a conversation between sovereign powers about mutual interests and shared benefits." "And if we refuse?" Kethvar asked. Webb's smile returned, but this time it carried a harder edge. "Then I think you'll discover that humans are remarkably creative when it comes to pursuing their interests through alternative channels. And I suspect that most of your member species would prefer to resolve this through diplomacy rather than find out exactly how creative we can be." The chamber fell silent as the representatives absorbed the full implications of the human position. They had thought they were dealing with a primitive species that could be easily controlled. Instead, they found themselves facing what appeared to be a sophisticated civilization that had been preparing for this moment since first contact. "What are your terms?" Ambassador Kethvar finally asked. "Simple," Webb replied. "Full recognition of human sovereignty over our claimed territories. An end to all restrictions on human expansion and development. And, most importantly, a seat on the Galactic Council Security Committee with full voting rights." The demands were stunning in their scope. The Security Committee was the most exclusive body in galactic government, reserved for the oldest and most influential species. No civilization less than 500 years old had ever been granted membership. "Impossible," the Arcturian delegate chimed. "The Security Committee membership is based on centuries of proven stability and wisdom." "With respect," Webb countered, "I think recent events have demonstrated that your definition of wisdom might need some updating. You attempted to restrict a species you didn't understand, using assumptions that proved to be completely incorrect. That doesn't suggest the kind of careful analysis one would expect from galactic leadership. And if we agree to these terms," Ilex asked, "what assurance do we have that humanity won't simply make additional demands in the future?" Webb's expression became genuinely serious for the first time in the conversation. "You have our word that we're interested in being productive members of the galactic community, not in dominating it. Humans prefer cooperation to conflict, but we insist on cooperation between equals." "Your word," Kethvar said skeptically. "And What value does that have? The same value as any diplomatic agreement, Webb replied. It's backed by our ability to enforce it and our understanding that breaking it would have consequences for everyone involved. But there's something else you should understand about humans. When we make a commitment, we keep it. It's a matter of honor. The concept of honor didn't translate well for many species, but Webb's tone suggested it carried significant weight in human decision-making. We need time to consider your proposal, Ambassador Kethvar said finally. Of course, Webb agreed. Take all the time you need. My diplomatic observers will remain in position to ensure our discussions aren't interrupted, and I'm sure Fleet Commander Zixtal is learning quite a bit about human hospitality at Proxima Tertius. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The representatives of 47 different species sat contemplating a universe that had suddenly become much more complicated. What do we do? The Pacifican representative asked, their distress pheromones still clouding their section of the chamber. Kethvar looked around at his colleagues, seeing his own uncertainty reflected in their various forms of body language. We adapt, he said finally, because I think we've just learned that humans aren't the only ones who need to evolve if we're all going to survive in the same galaxy. The negotiations have been going on for 6 standard days, and the stress was beginning to show on everyone involved. The Galactic Council's primary conference facility had been converted into what humans called a summit venue, with representatives from major galactic powers, human diplomats, and an increasingly complicated array of technical experts, military advisors, and legal specialists. Fleet Commander Zixtal had been released from Proxima Tertius 2 days earlier, along with his fleet, as what Admiral Webb called a gesture of good faith. The human ships had withdrawn to the edge of the system, but maintained their positions, close enough to respond quickly if needed, far enough away to avoid seeming overtly threatening. What bothered Zixtal most wasn't the memory of being outmaneuvered. He was a military professional, and he could accept being beaten by superior strategy. What bothered him was how completely he had misunderstood what he was facing. Every assumption he had made about human capabilities had proven not just wrong, but dramatically wrong. Now he sat in the conference facility's military briefing section, studying reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of human strategic planning. It wasn't just that they had more ships than expected, or that their technology was more advanced than anticipated. It was the depth and sophistication of their preparation. Commander, his aide, Lieutenant Korax, approached with yet another analysis report. The Intelligence Division has completed their assessment of the human surveillance operations. The results are significant. Zixtal accepted the data tablet with resignation. Each new report seemed to reveal another layer of human planning that had gone undetected. What did they find this time? Sir, it appears that humans have been conducting comprehensive intelligence gathering on galactic civilization for at least 20 years, since shortly after first contact. They've been systematically studying our military capabilities, political structures, economic systems, and social dynamics. 20 years. Zixtal's skin shifted to the pale yellow of surprise. But they were barely capable of interstellar travel 20 years ago. That's what we thought, sir. But the evidence suggests they were much further along in their development than they indicated. They appear to have deliberately concealed the true extent of their capabilities during the first contact period. Zixtal studied the report, feeling a growing sense of unease. The humans hadn't just been hiding military assets. They had been conducting what amounted to a comprehensive intelligence operation against the entire galactic community while presenting themselves as a primitive, non-threatening species. Lieutenant, he said slowly, in your professional opinion, what does this suggest about human strategic thinking? Korax's compound eyes flickered in what his species used to indicate deep consideration. Sir, if I were to characterize human strategy based on this evidence, I would say they approach interstellar politics the same way they apparently approach everything else, by preparing for multiple contingencies simultaneously while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to unexpected circumstances. Meaning, they never intended to be restricted by Galactic Council regulations, sir. They've been planning for this confrontation since the beginning, but they've also been preparing for dozens of other scenarios. They're not reactive. They're proactive to an almost unprecedented degree. Before Zixtal could respond, an announcement echoed through the facility's communication system. All military advisors report to Conference Room Alpha. Priority briefing in progress. The main briefing room was already crowded when Zixtal arrived. Representatives from a dozen different species military commands were present, along with several civilians he didn't recognize. At the front of the room stood Admiral Webb, but this time he was accompanied by another human, a woman wearing what appeared to be a military uniform with insignia that Zixtal's translation systems couldn't identify. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings," Webb began, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Maria Santos, former United States Marine Corps, currently serving as military liaison for the Colonial Defense Force. The Colonel has some information that I think will help clarify the human position on galactic security issues." Colonel Santos stepped forward, and Zixtal immediately noticed something different about her demeanor compared to the other humans he had encountered. Where Admiral Webb projected diplomatic confidence, Santos radiated what he could only describe as predatory competence. "Thank you, Admiral," Santos said, her voice carrying an undertone of absolute authority that seemed to command attention from every species present. "I've been asked to brief you on human military doctrine and capabilities, not to threaten anyone, but to make sure everyone understands what they're dealing with." She activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of local galactic space. First, let's address some misconceptions. Galactic intelligence estimates suggest that humanity possesses approximately 50 interstellar vessels and maintains military forces comparable to a minor colonial power. These estimates are incorrect. The display zoomed in to show the Sol system, revealing a level of military infrastructure that made several representatives gasp audibly. Orbital platforms, defensive installations, and what appeared to be massive shipyards surrounded not just Earth, but every major planet and moon in the system. Humanity currently operates 437 military vessels ranging from patrol craft to heavy cruisers, with an additional 112 vessels under construction. We maintain active military forces numbering approximately 12 million personnel across our colonial territories. The numbers were staggering, but Santos continued without pausing. More importantly, human military doctrine is based on what we call distributed defense in depth. Every human colony is fortified. Every civilian vessel carries military-grade sensors and communications equipment. Every human citizen receives basic military training as part of their education. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes or sensory organs of as many representatives as possible. What this means is that humanity doesn't have a military. Humanity is a military. Our entire civilization is organized around the principle that freedom and security cannot be separated. The Pacifican representative made a sound that their translation device rendered as horrified dismay. But that's barbaric. How can you maintain a peaceful society when everyone is a soldier?" Santos smiled, but it wasn't a particularly comforting expression. "That's where you've made your fundamental error in understanding human nature. We don't see military capability and peaceful society as contradictory concepts. In fact, we've learned over thousands of years of history that the most effective way to maintain peace is to be prepared for war." "But surely," interjected the Scholastic Republic representative, "such extensive militarization must consume enormous resources that could be better used for scientific advancement or cultural development." "Actually," no Santos replied, "human military research drives most of our technological advancement. Our weapons development programs have produced advances in energy generation, materials science, communications technology, and transportation systems that have civilian applications far beyond their military origins." She gestured, and the display showed images of human colonies that looked more like fortress cities than civilian settlements. But As Zixtal studied them more carefully, he began to understand what she meant. The defensive installations were integrated with civilian infrastructure in ways that actually enhanced the quality of life for residents. For example, Santos continued, our planetary defense shields double as weather control systems and solar energy collectors. Our military communication networks provide civilian internet services. Our weapons manufacturing facilities also produce consumer electronics and transportation vehicles. This is all very impressive, Ambassador Kethvar said, his bioluminescent markings indicating skepticism. But what does it have to do with the current diplomatic situation? Santos's expression became serious. It means that when the Galactic Council decided to impose restrictions on human expansion, you weren't dealing with a primitive species that could be easily managed. You were dealing with a military power that has been preparing for exactly this type of conflict for decades. She activated a new display showing tactical analyses of major galactic military forces. We've studied your capabilities, your strategies, your weaknesses. We know how you think about military force, how you plan operations, how you respond to threats. And we've designed our entire approach around countering those patterns. The implications of what she was saying began to dawn on the assembled representatives. The humans hadn't just been hiding their capabilities. They had been conducting strategic analysis of potential opponents since first contact. For example, Santos said, focusing on the Zilithian section of the room, Ambassador Kethvar's species relies heavily on energy weapons that require clear lines of sight and stable firing platforms. Human combat doctrine emphasizes mobility, cover, and close-quarters engagement that would negate most of those advantages. Kethvar's markings shifted to deep purple alarm as he realized the humans had been studying his people's military capabilities in detail. The Arcturian Collective, Santos continued, turning to their delegation, uses networked crystal arrays that provide superior computational power for tactical coordination. However, their system is vulnerable to specific forms of electromagnetic interference the human ships are equipped to generate. One by one, she went through the major galactic powers, describing their military strengths and how human doctrine was designed to counter them. It became clear that the humans hadn't just been preparing to defend themselves. They had been preparing to fight and win against any combination of galactic forces. Now, Santos said, her tone becoming more conciliatory, I want to emphasize that we're not interested in fighting anyone. But we needed you to understand that restrictions imposed by force wouldn't work against humanity. We're too well prepared, too well organized, and too determined to accept a subordinate position in galactic politics. Fleet Commander Zixtal found his voice. Colonel, are you saying that humans have been planning for war against the galactic community since first contact? Not planning for war, Commander, Santos corrected. Planning for freedom. There's a difference. War is what happens when one group tries to impose their will on another through force. What we've been planning for is the ability to maintain our independence regardless of what others might try to force us to do. She gestured again, and the display showed human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems. Every one of these settlements is self-sufficient and capable of defending itself. Even if somehow destroyed our home fleet and conquered Earth, the colonial settlements would continue to exist and grow. You can't defeat an idea by conquering territory, and the idea of human freedom isn't dependent on any single location or government. The room fell silent as the representatives absorbed this information. Finally, the Etherian delegate spoke up, their energy field flickering with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. Colonel, you've described an impressive military capability, but I'm curious about something else. How do you maintain social cohesion in such a militarized society? Doesn't constant preparation for conflict create internal tensions? Santos's expression softened slightly. That's an excellent question, and it gets to the heart of what makes human society different from most others you've encountered. We don't see military service as something separate from civilian life. It's part of what makes someone a full citizen. She activated a new display showing images from human colonies. Children in classrooms learning alongside adults in military uniforms, research facilities where scientists worked next to armed guards, construction projects where workers carried both tools and weapons. Humans have a saying, freedom isn't free. What that means is that maintaining a free society requires everyone to take responsibility for defending it. Our military service isn't just about preparing for external threats. It's about building the kind of social bonds and shared values that make freedom possible. But how do you prevent military leaders from taking control of civilian government? Asked the hierarchy of Vega representative, whose species' rigid command structure made civilian military cooperation difficult to understand. Santos smiled again, but this time with genuine warmth. Because in human society, there is no separation between military and civilian leadership. Our elected officials come from the military. Our military officers come from civilian backgrounds. We rotate people through different roles throughout their lives, so everyone understands both perspectives. She looked around the room again. The reason human military doctrine is so effective isn't because we're particularly warlike. It's because our entire society is invested in defending our way of life. When you threaten one human colony, you're threatening the families and friends of people spread across hundreds of worlds. Admiral Webb stepped forward again, which brings us back to the current negotiations. We're not here to threaten anyone or to demand tribute or territory. We're here to establish that humanity deserves respect as an equal partner in galactic civilization. And if that respect isn't forthcoming, Zixtal asked. Santos answered before Webb could respond. Then we'll continue to exist and grow and prosper regardless of whether the galactic community approves or not. We'd prefer to do it as friends and allies, but we're perfectly capable of doing it alone if necessary. The briefing session ended with the representatives filing out in thoughtful silence. As Zixtal prepared to leave, Colonel Santos approached him directly. Commander, she said quietly, I wanted to thank you for your professionalism during the incident at Proxima Tertius. Your crew was treated with respect because you conducted yourselves with honor. Zixtal's skin shifted to colors indicating surprised gratitude. Thank you, Colonel. I must admit, your people's conduct during that situation was educational. I hope so, Santos replied. Because what I want you to understand is that humans don't want to be your enemies. We'd much rather be your allies. But we learned a long time ago that you can't have real allies if you're not strong enough to be taken seriously. As Zixtal left the briefing room, he found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about interstellar politics. The humans hadn't just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. They had redefined what power meant. And he was beginning to suspect that the galactic community was going to have to adapt to that new reality whether they liked it or not. The next phase of negotiations was scheduled to begin in 6 hours. And for the first time since this crisis began, Zixtal found himself curious about what the humans would reveal next. Because if there was one thing he had learned about humanity, it was that they always had something more in reserve. The revelation came during what was supposed to be a routine technical briefing on hyperspace navigation protocols. Ambassador Kethvar had thought the worst surprises were behind them. Humanity's hidden fleet, their extensive intelligence operations, their military doctrine that turned entire civilizations into fortress states. But as he sat in the conference room listening to Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the human chief of xenotechnology research, he realized that everything they had learned so far was merely the foundation for something far more significant. The issue with current galactic hyperspace technology, Dr. Morrison was saying, her tone conversational despite the revolutionary implications of her words, is that it's fundamentally limited by the assumptions your species made during its development. She stood before a holographic display showing the standard galactic hyperspace network, the carefully mapped routes between systems that allowed for faster-than-light travel. Every species in the galaxy used variants of the same basic technology, following paths through hyperspace that had been established over millennia. You see hyperspace as a highway system, Morrison continued, with fixed routes between destinations that require massive infrastructure to maintain. Your jump gates, navigation beacons, and relay stations represent an investment of trillions of credits and thousands of years of development. The assembled representatives nodded along, unsure where this technical discussion was leading, but sensing from Morrison's tone that something important was coming. The problem is that this approach, while stable and predictable, is also incredibly inefficient. You're using perhaps 1% of hyperspace's actual potential. Admiral Webb, who had been sitting quietly at the side of the room, spoke up. "Doctor, I think our colleagues might benefit from a practical demonstration." Morrison smiled and activated her personal communication device. "Engineering, please prepare for hyperspace demonstration Alpha 7. Before anyone could ask what that meant, the room's viewports automatically polarized, and a soft alarm began sounding throughout the facility. Outside, they could see Nexus Prime's orbital traffic control systems beginning to broadcast emergency warnings, directing civilian vessels to clear specific approach vectors. "What's happening?" demanded the Arcturian representative, their crystalline form resonating with alarm frequencies. "We're about to show you something," Morrison replied, checking readings on a portable sensor device. 3 hours ago, we dispatched a message drone to the Kepler colony, approximately 47 light-years from here. Under normal galactic hyperspace protocols, that journey would require approximately 6 jumps through established gates and would take roughly 14 hours to complete. "Yes," confirmed the Scholastic Republic representative. "That's well within normal parameters for long-range communication." Morrison smiled. "The drone we sent didn't use your hyperspace network. It used human hyperspace technology." As if on cue, space outside the facility suddenly exploded with light as something massive dropped out of hyperspace barely 1,000 kilometers from Nexus Prime. Alarm klaxons began wailing throughout the orbital city as its defense systems tried to process the appearance of an unscheduled vessel in what should have been carefully controlled space. "That's impossible," Fleet Commander Zixtal said, staring at the tactical displays in disbelief. "Nothing that size could make a precision hyperspace exit that close to a gravity well. The gravitational distortions alone would tear any ship apart. Not if you understand hyperspace physics differently than your species do," Morrison replied calmly. "What you're looking at is the UES Magellan, a human exploration vessel that was conducting surveys in the Outer Rim territories yesterday. We recalled her for this demonstration." The implications of what they were witnessing began to dawn on the assembled representatives. If humans could make precision hyperspace jumps without using the established gate network, it meant they could move their ships anywhere in the galaxy without warning, without using predictable routes, and without being detected by standard monitoring systems. "Ow!" The question came from Ambassador Ilex, her tentacles weaving patterns of intense curiosity mixed with growing fear. "Different approach to the fundamental physics," Morrison explained, calling up new technical diagrams. "Your species discovered hyperspace technology by observing natural phenomena, cosmic strings, gravitational anomalies, subspace fluctuations. You learned to follow the paths that nature provided." "That's correct," confirmed the Therian representative. "Hyperspace routes follow natural formations in the fabric of space-time itself." "Right," Morrison agreed. "But humans approach the problem differently. Instead of following natural paths, we learn to create our own." She gestured, and the display showed a 3-dimensional map of local space with the traditional hyperspace routes marked in blue. Then, new lines appeared in red. Human hyperspace corridors that ignored the established network entirely, cutting directly between systems and patterns that violated everything the galactic community understood about faster-than-light travel. "We discovered that hyperspace isn't a fixed network of natural highways," Morrison continued. "It's a malleable medium that can be shaped and directed through the application of specific energy fields. What you think of as impossible routes are only impossible if you accept the limitations of naturally occurring phenomena. But the power requirements alone." The Arcturian delegate protested. Creating artificial hyperspace corridors would require more energy than most star systems generate. Morrison's smile widened. Only if you're thinking about it the way your species do. Humans have developed what we call cascade field manipulation. Instead of brute forcing our way through hyperspace, we use carefully tuned energy fields to convince the medium that our artificial routes are natural ones. The technical explanation was almost as alarming as the demonstration itself. If humanity had solved the fundamental problems of hyperspace manipulation, it meant they possessed a level of technological sophistication that dwarfed anything in the galactic community. Dr. Morrison, Ambassador HFY said slowly, his bioluminescent markings cycling through colors indicating deep concern. Are you telling us that humanity has developed hyperspace technology that's superior to anything the rest of the galaxy possesses? Not superior, Morrison corrected. Different. Your technology is mature, stable, and predictable. Ours is flexible, efficient, and adaptable. Both approaches have their advantages, such as, well, for example, your hyperspace network is vulnerable to interdiction. Destroy a few key gate stations, and entire sectors become isolated. Human hyperspace technology doesn't depend on fixed infrastructure, so it's much harder to disrupt. The military implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy based their strategic planning on the assumption that enemy forces could only move along predictable routes at predictable speeds. Human technology made those assumptions obsolete. There's something else, Morrison continued, and her tone suggested that the previous revelations have been merely preliminary. Human hyperspace technology isn't just faster and more flexible than yours. It's also much quieter. Quieter? Zixtal asked. Your hyperspace engines generate massive subspace distortions that can be detected from several light years away. Our engines? She paused to check her sensor readings again. Well, until the Magellan dropped out of hyperspace right outside this facility, your sensors had no idea she was coming. The silence that followed was deafening. The assembled representatives were beginning to understand that humanity's military advantages went far beyond superior numbers or better tactics. They had achieved fundamental technological breakthroughs that changed the basic rules of interstellar warfare. How long? The question came from the hierarchy of Vega representative, their rigid posture betraying unusual emotional distress. How long have you possessed this technology? Morrison exchanged glances with Admiral Webb, who nodded permission for her to continue. We achieved our first successful hyperspace field manipulation approximately 15 years ago. Practical applications for Starship propulsion were developed 8 years ago. The current generation of human vessels has been using this technology for the past 5 years. 5 years, Zixtal repeated, his skin shifting to the pale yellow of shocked realization. You've been moving ships throughout the galaxy undetected for 5 years. Not undetected, Admiral Webb interjected. Unnoticed. There's a difference. We haven't been hiding our movements. We've simply been making them using methods your sensor networks aren't designed to recognize. This explains much, the Mindari representative said, their telepathic abilities allowing them to sense the growing panic in the room. The intelligence operations, the surveillance of our border stations, the sudden appearance of your fleets at Proxima Tertius. You've been using this technology to position assets throughout galactic space. For defensive purposes, Webb emphasized. We needed to understand the strategic environment we were operating in, and we needed to be prepared for various contingencies, such as the restrictions the Council attempted to impose, HFY observed. Among other things, Webb agreed. But I think Dr. Morrison has more to show you. Morrison activated another display, this one showing what appeared to be real-time sensor data from across the galaxy. Dozens of systems were highlighted, showing human vessels in locations that should have been impossible to reach without being detected by galactic monitoring networks. This is the current disposition of the Colonial Defense Force, Morrison explained. As you can see, we maintain a presence in most major sectors of galactic space, not as occupying forces, but as observers and rapid response assets. Rapid response to what? Demanded Ambassador Ilex. To threats against human interests, certainly, Webb replied. But also to threats against galactic stability in general. Humanity may be the newest member of the galactic community, but we have a vested interest in maintaining peace and prosperity throughout civilized space. You're monitoring us, Kethvar accused. All of us. We're monitoring everything, Webb confirmed without apology. Just as your intelligence services monitor us and each other. The difference is that we're more effective at it. Morrison stepped forward again. But there's something else we want you to understand. Our hyperspace technology isn't just a military tool. It has enormous potential for civilian applications. She called up new displays showing human cargo vessels moving between systems at speeds that made traditional trade routes obsolete. We can transport goods between any 2 points in the galaxy in a matter of hours rather than days or weeks. We can provide emergency medical evacuation from remote colonies. We can deliver disaster relief supplies to anywhere they're needed almost immediately. What are you proposing? Asked the Etherian representative, their energy field flickering with what appeared to be cautious interest. Partnership, Webb said simply. We're willing to share our hyperspace technology with the galactic community, but only under specific conditions, which are full recognition of human sovereignty over our territories, membership in the Galactic Security Council with full voting rights, and establishment of joint research programs that give all participating species access to human technological innovations. The offer was breathtaking in its scope. Access to human hyperspace technology would revolutionize galactic civilization, cutting transportation times by orders of magnitude, and opening up regions of space that had previously been considered too remote for practical colonization. And if we refuse? Kethvar asked. Then you continue using your existing technology while humanity uses ours, Webb replied. We'll coexist peacefully, but as separate technological civilizations rather than as integrated partners. You're blackmailing us, the Arcturian representative accused, their crystalline form resonating with indignation. No, Webb corrected firmly. Blackmail involves threats of harm. We're offering you benefits in exchange for recognition of mutual respect. There's a significant difference. Dr. Morrison spoke up again. Ambassador, I want you to understand something about human technological development. We don't innovate in isolation. Our best advances come from collaboration with others who bring different perspectives and capabilities to research problems. She gestured toward the assembled representatives. Your species have insights into physics, engineering, biology, and mathematics that could accelerate human development in ways we can barely imagine. But, equally important, human approaches to problem solving could help your species overcome obstacles that have limited your development for centuries. Such as, well, for example, the Arcturian Collective's crystal-based computing systems are incredibly powerful, but they're vulnerable to specific forms of interference. Human shielding technology could solve that problem completely. Meanwhile, Arcturian computational methods could help us optimize our hyperspace field calculations in ways that would make our ships even faster and more efficient. Morrison looked around the room, making eye contact with representatives from different species. The Etherian energy manipulation techniques could revolutionize human power generation systems. Zilithian bioluminescent technology could be adapted for human communication systems. Mindari telepathic research could help us develop better interfaces between biological and artificial intelligence. A true partnership, Admiral Webb added, based on mutual benefit rather than one-sided restrictions. The representatives sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the implications of what they had been offered. Humanity wasn't just proposing a diplomatic solution to the current crisis. They were offering to fundamentally transform galactic civilization through technological cooperation. How do we know you won't use superior technology to dominate us? The hierarchy of Vega representative asked. Webb's expression became serious. Because domination isn't sustainable, and humans always think long-term. We want partners, not subjects. Partners are more innovative, more productive, and more reliable than subjects. And, frankly, the galaxy is a big place with room for everyone to prosper. Besides, Colonel Santos added from her position at the back of the room, humans have learned from our own history that technological superiority is always temporary. Today's advanced civilization becomes tomorrow's historical footnote if they don't continue to adapt and grow. We'd rather be part of a galactic community that's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. As the briefing session ended and the representatives began filing out to prepare for the next phase of negotiations, Fleet Commander Zixtal found himself reconsidering not just humanity's place in galactic civilization, but the entire future of interstellar society. The humans weren't just demanding respect as equals. They were offering to elevate everyone else to a higher level of technological capability. The question now was whether the galactic community was wise enough to accept that offer or prideful enough to reject it and face the consequences of being left behind. 6 months after the Nexus Prime Accords were signed, Fleet Commander Zixtal stood in the observation deck of a UES Determination, watching the impossible happen before his eyes. Through the reinforced viewport, he could see the construction of what humans called a joint research facility, taking shape in the space between two gas giants in the Kepler system. But calling it a research facility was like calling a star system a neighborhood. The structure already spanned nearly 50 kilometers in its longest dimension, and it was still growing. More remarkably, it was being built using techniques and technologies that represented a fusion of engineering principles from a dozen different species, coordinated through human project management systems that somehow made sense of the chaos. Impressive, isn't it? Colonel Santos appeared beside him, carrying 2 cups of what humans called coffee, a mildly stimulating beverage that had become surprisingly popular among several galactic species. Impossible is more accurate, Zixtal replied, accepting the offered cup gratefully. 3 weeks ago, the Arcturian Collective and the Etherian Republic couldn't agree on basic safety protocols. Today, they're working together to build quantum computational arrays that neither species could create alone. Humans have a talent for making impossible things seem inevitable, Santos observed. It's one of our more useful traits. Zixtal studied the construction site more carefully. Arcturian crystal formations were being grown around Etherian energy cores, creating hybrid systems that pulsed with power signatures he'd never seen before. Zalithian bioluminescent networks provided real-time status monitoring for Mindari telepathic coordination nodes. And everywhere, human engineers moved between the different species' work areas, somehow translating not just languages but entire conceptual frameworks. How do you do it? He asked. How do you make species that have been rivals for centuries suddenly start collaborating like they've been allies forever? Santos smiled, but her expression carried a hint of something deeper than casual amusement. It's not magic, Commander, though it probably looks like it from the outside. Humans have been dealing with diversity for our entire history. Every human culture, every nation, every community has had to figure out how to work with neighbors who think differently, worship differently, organize their societies differently. She gestured toward the construction site. What you're seeing out there is just the latest version of something humans have been practicing for thousands of years. We've learned that the key to successful cooperation isn't making everyone the same. It's figuring out how different strengths can complement each other. But the technical integration alone, Sixtal Pretestif, Arcturian crystal technology operates on completely different physical principles than Etherian energy manipulation. How can they possibly be combined? By not trying to force them to be the same, Santos explained. Human engineers don't try to make Arcturian crystals work like Etherian energy fields. Instead, they figure out how to make them work together while still being what they are. She activated a portable display showing technical schematics of the construction project. Look at this quantum computing array. The Arcturian crystals provide massive parallel processing power, but they're vulnerable to quantum decoherence. Etherian energy fields can maintain quantum coherence, but they lack the computational structure to process complex calculations. And the human contribution? We provide the interface technology that lets each system do what it does best while compensating for what it can't do. The crystals handle the calculations, the energy fields maintain coherence, and human control systems coordinate the whole process. Zixtal studied the schematics, beginning to understand the elegant complexity of what he was looking at. It's not just technological integration, he realized. It's conceptual integration. You're not just combining different tools. You're combining different ways of thinking about problems. Exactly, Santos confirmed. And that's where the real breakthroughs happen. When you get different perspectives working on the same problem, you don't just get better solutions. You get solutions that none of the individual contributors could have imagined alone. A soft chime from the ship's communication system interrupted their conversation. Colonel Santos, Admiral Webb requests your presence in conference room. Priority briefing in 15 minutes. Duty calls, Santos said, finishing her coffee. Care to join me? I think you'll find this particular briefing interesting. Conference room, it had been modified since Zixtal's last visit to accommodate representatives from multiple species. The human tendency toward inclusivity meant that important discussions now routinely included perspectives from across the galactic community, creating a new model for interstellar cooperation that was being studied by political scientists throughout civilized space. Admiral Webb stood at the front of the room, but he was flanked by beings that represented the new reality of post-Accord's galactic politics. Ambassador Ilex of the Cephalopod Collective served as the current rotating chair of the Joint Scientific Council. Dr. Krentar, an Arcturian scientist, directed the new Integrated Technology Division. Even the hierarchy of Vega had contributed personnel, though their rigid command structure required some creative adaptation to human collaborative methods. Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed beings, Webb began, we've reached a significant milestone in the joint research program. Dr. Morrison, would you please brief our colleagues on Project Synthesis? Dr. Morrison stepped forward, her expression carrying the barely contained excitement of a scientist about to reveal a major breakthrough. 6 weeks ago, we began exploring the possibility of combining human hyperspace technology with Mindari telepathic communication systems. The goal was to create instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. The implications of such technology were staggering. Current galactic communication systems were limited by the speed of light, making real-time conversations between distant star systems impossible. Even using hyperspace message drones, communication delays of hours or days were routine. The challenge, Morrison continued, was that human hyperspace fields and Mindari telepathic transmissions operate on completely different physical principles. Hyperspace manipulation involves folding space-time itself, while telepathic communication uses quantum entanglement effects that don't interact normally with hyperspace phenomena. How did you solve it? Asked Dr. Krentar, his crystalline form resonating with academic interest. We didn't, Morrison replied with a smile. We found a different approach entirely. Instead of trying to make hyperspace carry telepathic signals, we discovered that we could use hyperspace fields to create localized quantum entanglement effects that Mindari telepaths can then use as communication channels. The technical explanation was complex, but the practical implications were clear. We've successfully demonstrated instantaneous communication between this facility and research stations in the Vega system, the Cygnus sector, and the Outer Rim territories. Instantaneous, Zixtal asked, struggling to process what he was hearing. Completely instantaneous, Morrison confirmed. The communication doesn't travel through space at all. It uses quantum entanglement effects that exist outside normal space-time. There's no delay, no signal degradation, and no possibility of interception by conventional means. Ambassador Ilex's tentacles wove patterns of amazement mixed with concern. Dr. Morrison, the implications of this technology for military applications are significant, Admiral Webb acknowledged. But That's why we're implementing it as a joint program rather than keeping it as a human advantage. Every species that participates in the research consortium will have access to the technology. More importantly, added Dr. Krentar, the breakthrough required insights from multiple species working together. Human hyperspace theory provided the foundation. Mindari telepathic research provided the communication mechanism, and Arcturian computational systems provided the calculation power needed to coordinate quantum entanglement across interstellar distances. No single species could have developed this technology alone, Morrison emphasized. It represents the kind of advancement that's only possible through true collaborative research. Colonel Santos leaned forward, which brings us to the next phase of the project. We want to expand the research consortium to include every species in the galactic community. Even species that haven't signed the accords? Asked the Therian representative, their energy field flickering with surprise. Especially species that haven't signed the accords, Webb replied. The goal isn't to create exclusive advantages for consortium members. It's to advance the capabilities of galactic civilization as a whole. The proposal was bold, even by human standards. Several species had refused to join the original research programs, either out of pride, fear of human dominance, or simple political inertia. Offering them access to breakthrough technologies without requiring political concessions represented a significant departure from traditional diplomatic practice. What's the strategic rationale? Zixtal asked, his military training making him suspicious of apparently altruistic gestures. Santos smiled. Long-term thinking, Commander. The bigger our research consortium becomes, the more diverse perspectives we have working on problems, and the faster we achieve breakthroughs that benefit everyone. But more practically, Webb added, species that are excluded from technological advancement tend to become sources of instability. We'd rather have them as partners in progress than as potential threats to galactic peace. There's something else, Morrison said, activating a new display that showed projections of technological development over time. Our models suggest that collaborative research doesn't just produce better results. It produces exponentially better results. Every new species that joins the consortium doesn't just add their capabilities to ours. They multiply the effectiveness of everyone else's contributions. The mathematics were compelling. Traditional research and development followed linear progression patterns, with improvements accumulating steadily over time. But the collaborative model showed exponential growth curves that suggested dramatic acceleration in technological capability. We're not just talking about faster ships or better weapons, Morrison explained. We're talking about fundamental breakthroughs in physics, engineering, biology, and consciousness studies that could transform what it means to be a spacefaring civilization. Such as, asked Ambassador Ilex, terraforming technology that could make any world habitable within decades instead of centuries. Medical advances that could extend lifespans for any species by orders of magnitude. Energy systems that could provide unlimited clean power. Transportation technology that could make travel between galaxies as routine as travel between star systems. The vision Morrison was describing bordered on science fantasy, but the practical demonstrations of human-alien collaborative technology suggested it might be achievable. What do you need from us? Zixtal asked. Help convincing the holdout species to join, Webb replied. The Geometric Collective is concerned about intellectual property rights. The Thermal Empire worries about losing their competitive advantages in high-temperature engineering. The Deep Current Realm thinks the whole thing is a human plot to achieve technological dominance. Is it? The question came from Dr. Krentar, asked with the directness that Arcturians were known for. Webb considered the question seriously before answering. In the sense that we want human civilization to thrive and prosper, yes. But we've learned that the best way to ensure human prosperity is to make sure everyone else prospers too. Prosperous neighbors are peaceful neighbors, and peaceful neighbors make better research partners than hostile competitors. Besides, Santos added, technological dominance is a temporary advantage at best. The only sustainable approach is to make sure you're always part of the group that's pushing the boundaries of what's possible. As the briefing concluded and the participants began discussing implementation,